Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here with all of us today. My name is Macy Sotantio, and today I will be co-presenting with T and Tiffany Joseph on this very important topic, autistic communication and masking. I will start the presentation on autistic communication. I am the founder of Autism Career Pathways, a nonprofit here based in San Francisco Bay Area. My background was in psychology and instructional and curriculum design. I have worked with autistic individuals for over 30 years as a family coach. And in 2019, I shifted gear to become an autistic inclusivity consultant and a family coach, and just working more with autistic adults, trying to redefine meaningful employment for everyone, including autistic people who are needing higher level of support and non-speaking autistic adults wanting to figure out the best way to be employed as small business owners. I love hosting engaging events. That's our signature with Autism Career Pathways. We want to create unique and creative ways to engage with our community so they can learn more about creating a space for neurodivergent people in a workforce. Okay. Now, I'm going to get started to chat about autistic communication and how it is different than neurotypical communication. What I can say is that autistic communication, autistic people in general, we are very much driven by special interests. You can call it passion. It's more than just hobbies. It's really our special interests and our reaction to sensory stimuli. It really drives us in positive ways, but also in challenging ways at times. So to communicate with autistic people, I think there has to be a meeting in the middle where we are allowed to share our special interests, whatever that may be. Here is a photo that belonged to a former client of mine, and he really loved the color orange, and he really loved to collect just random items around the house, and he loves to put them in order. And to me, this looks really beautiful. And this young man is now a proud owner of Big Al's Best, and his company sells delicious toffee in San Diego area. And he's also an active member of the community. He does a lot of volunteer work. And in every type of work that he does, whether it's at home or out in the community, there's always this signature of his special interest, his ability to really organize his space and group items. Special interest is very, very important for autistic people. The second point talks about how autistic communication is very much influenced by sensory processing and information processing capacity in the moment. Now, when you think about autistic people, our sensory processing is much different, because for me, I am very hypersensitive to sound and light and smell. My ability to process information in the moment really varies from moment to moment, not just day to day, by the bandwidth that I have in the moment. So if my battery meter just happens to be low, and it's possible when I'm out and about and someone calls me my name, I wouldn't even notice it until that person would just keep calling me and trying to get my attention. So that's very much possible. So it's autistic people often, when it comes to being able to engage with other people, they're most of the time it's not easy for us, and the reason behind it, it's very much influenced by our ability to be able to process information and whether or not we have sensory distractions in the moment. There are a lot of competing elements in the moment for us when and that affects our ability to notice an invitation to connect and also be able to respond to it. Okay. And it is qualitatively and quantitatively expressed differently using nonverbal and verbal communication channels. What I mean by this is, I think in general, over 80% of human communication is actually expressed using nonverbal communication channels. So what are those nonverbal communication channels? Of course, we have the verbal channel, the spoken channel, mouth words, as some people say. We also have eye gaze as meaningful use of communication. We also use body orientation. We also use voice inflections. We also use facial expressions. We also use hand gestures. So there are many, many different channels of communication. And when you think about it, we communicate our intentions using mostly the nonverbal communication channels, and the verbal communication channel is a part of it. Now, for autistic people, we may prefer to use all of the other nonverbal communication channels to connect with each other. And maybe for neurotypical people, they rely mostly on verbal communication channel to get their intention communicated to a partner. But for autistic people, that combination looks very, very differently. And I'm going to show you more later in the 2 video clips that I have. So when we think about what from one autistic people to another, and we look at the way each person prefer to communicate, it's all different. But I know for sure, as an autistic person, when I communicate with another autistic person, I don't have a problem to connect and to understand. I think it's because we're just in sync intuitively. And I think that's wonderful. Okay, so let's talk about the whys of autistic communication. The number one reason that an autistic person can and want to connect with other people is actually to connect and to share our experiences with others. I think it's a myth that we are perceived as antisocial. Or not wanting to have friends. We do, just like everyone else, we want to have a sense of belonging. We really do, but we just do that in our own ways. So our number one reason is to want to connect and share experiences, maybe share our special interests with other people. And the second reason is we want to communicate a level of trust and interest, which I think is just like in any kind of relationship, that's where everyone would begin, right? So you wouldn't call a friend, like somebody you meet, just a friend right away, but you want to invest in time and to get to know the person, and you want to have a sense of, yeah, I like this person. We have a lot of common interests, and I can trust this person as a confidant, you know? So it's the same for us as well. So for autistic people, we really appreciate people who can be an anchor to us. So this is why for younger autistic people, you see them, for example, they may use their verbal communication channel more so at home, because obviously at home they feel safe at home, and they feel like they can say whatever they want, however they want to say it, and nobody would judge them, for example. And yet maybe they're different at school. At school, they wouldn't say anything. It's because they don't feel comfortable. Maybe they feel like other peers in the classroom can speak a lot more, and there's that gap. So they don't feel as confident. Where at home, this little kid has mom and dad as their anchor, and they can be themselves. So that's an important keep in mind. To self-advocate, all of us, I think, find our ways to self-advocate, not just through being able to say, I don't want it, or I need time, and so on. We do it, and so we use the other channels of communication to really tell others, asking for help, or I'm not clear about this, or is this good enough? Do you understand what I'm saying? So those are just some important phrases that an autistic person might work very hard to a partner or whoever is in the room to communicate self-advocacy. But unfortunately, with all of the deficit model that is commonly being used everywhere with young kids, our efforts to communicate using nonverbal communication channels are often bypassed because it's not good enough unless we actually say those phrases. And the opposite is actually true, where we use everything in our power to use gestures, facial expression, maybe to push something away, to shake our heads to communicate no, or maybe we cry. All of these expressions for self-advocacy are often perceived as that's not good enough, because you have to say, I need help. So that's another important keep in mind. Self-guiding, this is an important one. So typically when we make decisions, if it's just easy decisions, like you decide to put on your clothes every morning, or do whatever decisions that you do in cruise control, because you've done it so many times, you don't have to think much about it, right? But for autistic people, because we often struggle with sensory processing information, we often struggle to just know what is the first step, one small step that I have to do. All these decision-making process, we have to work very hard to bring it up to the very conscious level, and we think out loud to self-guide ourselves. I actually, when I drive, for example, I tend to talk to myself to guide myself, because I get lost a lot, or when during moments of uncertainties, we talk to guide ourselves. And to others, it might seem repetitive, but to us, it serves a very, very important function, to be able to talk to ourselves, maybe repeat it over and over, because one, it soothes us. Also, it's a way for us to make sense of what we have to do in the moment, and hopefully it will help us to make the best decision in the moment. Okay. Self-preservation. I don't think I have to talk or describe much about this. It's very important to communicate the need for space or break, or just telling you, look, I'll just say what you want me to say, because I just need you to stop. That's the function of self-preservation. And lastly is masking. My colleague T will be speaking on this very important topic. Masking is to cater to others' expectations in different ways because we know that is expected. Maybe we have been trained or groomed to behave in a certain way or to be able to say certain things, but it's not according to our true nature. So I will stop there on the topic of masking because T will elaborate later. Okay, so I will show you a video to illustrate this is a video to illustrate all the communication channels that I mentioned earlier. Now, all babies start learning how to communicate intuitively with their parents using the nonverbal communication channels first. So this is actually my baby at the age of 4 months. She's 16 today. And let's look at how Emma communicated interests. And as you watch this clip progress, you will see that she was losing her interests and she had no problem telling dad, you know, I'm ready for something a little bit different. And I want you to see what nonverbal communication clue that Emma used to tell my husband to stop. So it's a short clip, but I think it would illustrate my point earlier about the importance of respecting nonverbal communication channels.
Peekaboo! Who's there? Peekaboo!
That's great.
Who's there? Peekaboo! Peekaboo! Who's there? Peekaboo! I see a little nose and a little mouth. Who's under my hand? It's Emma! Peekaboo! Peekaboo! Look, we can actually see your neck for a change.
Okay, so definitely you saw her not having any difficulties at all, even though she did not have the mouth words yet, but she was able to communicate using all those channels of communication, the use of facial expressions, vocal play, voice inflections, eye gaze. And as she lost her interest, she got a little bit quieter. And the last part where she communicated, okay, I'm totally done, she actually used gaze aversion. Now, gaze aversion is actually very much part of meaningful communication. We all look away when we're thinking about something, when we're processing information, when we feel uncomfortable, we look away. That is just like, I think most people do that. And yet autistic people are perceived as, you know, if they don't use eye contact as part of their speech, it's not correct. And actually, gaze aversion is very much part of that meaningful communication. So that's an important keep in mind. I want everyone to think about. And secondly, babies learn to communicate using nonverbal communication channel first in context, the context of that back and forth play. And it's all very, very intuitive, right? And for autistic children, they're actually a lot of times being trained to speak first without context. So that sequence is backwards. Okay, so another video clip that I'm going to show you is a video clip of a little boy who has apraxia, and he's also learning how to use an AAC device, although in this particular video, he is just communicating with his mom. And what I want to spotlight in this video is the communication pauses. If you give us some time to process information, then we are able to reciprocate with our own ways, and we can do it very, very clearly. And here's an example of that.
What? What does it need? Open. Open. What's that?
One.
One battery. Two batteries. Two batteries. Light on, light off. Light.
Okay, so in this video, we see everything that we've talked about. We see the special interests because he loves trains. We see context because he's changing the batteries of his trains, and the way he perceived his mom as an anchor of, you know, mom, watch me do this. And you see him using all of the nonverbal communication channels beautifully, including his eye gaze, gaze aversion as he's thinking, trying to figure things out with his hands. I think this is a really good example of meaningful autistic and neurotypical communication all together. So I hope you keep this in mind, and the communication space, it's really, really important to allow time to process. So that is it for my presentation. So I am going to introduce T next. I'm going to go back to sharing my screen. Okay. And this is just my information here. And if people have more questions, that is my Instagram account and Facebook and our nonprofit's website address. And now we are going to show T. So I've been really privileged to get to know T through our work together in the monthly support group that we do with a group of us. So without further ado, T will take on autistic masking as the next topic. So go ahead, T. Oh, I think I'll read this part for T. My name is T. I'm an autistic adult. I enjoy listening to all kinds of autistic people and their families and sharing my own story in hopes to build a more truly inclusive world. And T, you're doing such a great job. I learned so much from your posts. So thank you so much for educating me. And I mean, I think your posts always mean a lot to many, many people. So I'm going to read the next question for T. Autistic masking as a form of communication. What is masking?
Masking, in the most general term, is using valuable energy to suppress natural traits, movement, ways of thinking, and coping in order to decrease negative responses and increase positive ones.
Is there a difference between autistic and neurotypical masking?
Since I'm not neurotypical, I can only go off what they tell me. But it's different to holding your tongue after your boss makes you angry or acting different with different types of people. Neurotypical people are already the default. So masking for autistic people is more extreme. So I guess it would be like pretending you didn't need to breathe or eat. And eating little bits of food out of sight of other people, and taking little breaths of air. Think about how hard that would be, how exhausting. I have to use such extremes because for autistic people there is no rest. There is no vacation. The work uniform does not come off. The customer service voice does not go away. Imagine excusing yourself whenever you couldn't take it anymore, or just breathing and eating out in the open because your body has less control, or you just can't bring yourself to care about the negative responses. That's why some people seem mean. They don't care anymore. I make an effort to still be fairly kind. Partly because people treat you better, mostly because it literally hurts me to be cruel.
Can you give us examples of autistic masking, please?
I didn't mask based on different. I can only speak for myself. Most of the masking I did required 100% mental control over my limbs, lots of silence, or too much talking, and lots of nodding, and using context clues in social situations. I didn't mask based on different situations. I masked the same everywhere, even at home. I numbed myself to all emotions because I can't spot reduce. I remained silent and allowed people to speak for me instead of taking my time. Or I used lots of scripting, things I heard from movies or TV shows or other people in interactions. I would feign comprehension by nodding and smiling in appropriate contexts, and sometimes make mistakes and do so in inappropriate contexts. I would show no interest in unacceptable things, which for me was usually seen as an immature interest, and would pretend to have interest in acceptable things. This communicates normalcy. It extended to my own inner world even. I would stop my own thoughts. I would write in my diary what I thought teenagers were supposed to write about. I would wear clothes that made me float outside of my body, making it much harder to concentrate. I would copy things other people did, not inherently bad, but I did it too obviously, so people were made uncomfortable by it. Masking communicates that you are one of the people you are interacting with. I just wasn't very good of convincing people of this. I am affected too much by my environment, have learning disabilities, poor body awareness, various other things. I'm convincing through written words but not in real life, which I would say is why I experienced so many negative responses. And though I can hold off some meltdowns until I get to a safe place to release, I can't hold them all off. I remember every meltdown and every reaction people had to it. They would be sudden and explosive, and everyone would wonder how someone usually so quiet and well-behaved would do such a thing.
Next question. Is masking always bad?
And I mask within my culture and still fail often. I think the ability to even nod and smile at the appropriate times, or suppress stims, is an advantage. Especially for Black autistic people, it can be the difference between life and death. We mask X too. Or to be like me, hold various identities. I mask within my culture and still fail often in expectations, mainly because I struggle to code switch. Because for many of us, masking is a direct trauma response. It's hard to see it as a privilege. But an advantage in the ability to do so is To even think of opting out of the rat race is proof of a safer environment, having power, or a disregard of your own survival. I've disregarded mine a few times. Sometimes I have no choice because I can't conjure comprehension out of the air. If I'm asked to actually do something, nodding and smiling and being still won't cut it. The ability to change behavior is the difference between a lifetime of isolation and abuse. Some of us end up experiencing more of that later, once our energy levels decrease. I don't find it good or bad, just necessary for survival. But once you're at a point where the cons of living outweigh death, you get our suicide rate and low life expectancy. Masking is similar in some ways to assimilating to a different culture as well, and it's good to learn about different people, or you wouldn't be listening to me. However, autistic people exist in every culture and suffer in different ways. I upset people here with my antics, and I would no doubt eventually upset someone in Japan, not due to culture, but my neurology and the way I process the world. Some countries are better places for some things, worse for others.
Next question.
I-
Ooh, sorry,
That's
T.
comes down to choice.
Yeah, please continue.
Since I've made attempts at masking for years, I have access to things I wouldn't otherwise, but I suffer in different ways. Because I can sometimes speak, because I can communicate a level of self-awareness, I am seen as a conscious threat instead of a disabled pity, but both are dangerous. I've been seen as a pity many times, just not knowingly disabled. So I think it's all about balance. And especially get more input from autistic people on what that balance is for each person.
Okay. Next question. What are detrimental impacts of masking?
There's even my own family has forgotten my existence. There's a lot of people who don't really know who I am. Because I didn't come around when I didn't have energy to pretend. Because I excused myself whenever I got upset. Didn't go to things that would upset me. Because I didn't communicate if it meant I didn't speak. I was there in every instance, but noon saw me. Even my own family has forgotten my existence many times. I guess because I am quiet. I watch quiet people though myself, because they are like me. When I was little, I don't think I cared if people saw me or not. I was forced into their world only to realize the value I had started seeing in other people didn't see in me. Living life that is like only being known through pictures on social media. You don't learn about what autism or anything can really be like. I did eventually make some real life friends that do know what I am like, 2 of which parent an autistic son together, which probably helps, but they are special people. Pretending to comprehend and just going along with things whether I understood or not got me into a lot of trouble. I spoke even when I wasn't fully aware of what I was saying, which is why I use AAC now. It prevents those errors in communication. I had no concept of how a friend should actually treat you. I had no concept of what I actually liked or how I should actually feel when I'm not in pain. And as a result, there's a lot of things I pretended I understood, and now I actually understand, as an adult, when I could probably have it down by now, if slower learning and movement, or learning in childish ways wasn't so looked down upon. For me personally, the most detrimental is that it often was for nothing. Because I wasn't good at pretending. I wasted a lot of time and energy on something I can't even master. I thought I was a great actor, only to find out I was the worst. I suspect quite a few autistic people to be as oblivious as I was to this. That's why it never got much better, because I wasn't blending in. Wasted time is time you can't get back.
Next question. Oops. How can unmasking be encouraged at home?
For movement. Encourage movement in all movement. I learned to be stock still for so many years of my life. I have trouble moving even when I need to. Even when I want to. I love to dance, but I spend so much time being still that I need extra occupational therapy to feel my limbs enough to do so. Even when I need to communicate distress, I freeze up, and my face does not always communicate distress. Encourage movement in all kinds of ways. Any kind of way. Try some of that holistic shaking therapy that is just repackaged stimming in an acceptable field. Headbang to metal music. Or go to a church and get possessed by the Holy Ghost if that's more your thing. It's so important we have a place to remove the mask, and at home with family is where we should feel safest to do so. Reflecting, unmasking, pondering who you actually are for even a minute is such a privilege not afforded to everyone. Don't make home into a prison. Encourage questions and admitting when one doesn't understand something. Encourage exercises using all the available senses. Encourage anything that just feels right. Identify emotions and thoughts instead of ignoring them. Learn from people who cannot mask well or at all, especially children. They know exactly what their bodies need to do.
And if anyone has any questions for T, you can find T on Instagram at Galaxy Brain, Facebook at Unmask, TikTok and Twitter at Galaxy Brain. Thank you so much, Dee. That was so impactful and insightful. Thank you so much for sharing your stories to us.
Thank you.
Okay, we're moving on to part three with Tiffany Joseph, who will be guiding us on augmentative and assistive or alternative communication. So Tiffany, you can, I will just read this part to introduce you. My name is Tiffany Joseph. I am an autistic parent of neurodivergent children. I like teaching parents and autistic people about each other so that we can work together and solve big societal issues with education, communication, and public stigma. First slide, all about AAC. What is AAC?
AAC stands for Augmentative and Assistive or Alternative Communication. It's an umbrella term for a set of visual languages that aren't speech, or in many cases, assist those who cannot use speech to communicate. It's important to note official sign languages are also not AAC, as they're also their own languages.
What are some examples of AAC methods of communication?
Examples of AAC are speech-generating apps and devices that turn pictures or text into speech with technology. Drawing pictures or using picture cards to convey an idea is an example. Social media, texting, and writing are also forms of AAC.
Why use AAC if you are capable of using verbal communication?
I needed AAC, or learning to write and put letters together to speak in the first place. Without that, I would have had a much harder time learning to say my own spontaneous thoughts through speech. And had I had the current AAC technology or techniques when I was younger, I would have learned much earlier to make speech. Plus, speech isn't a better form of communication than others. Yes, it is more convenient in a world that places its value as the supreme method of conveying information. But that doesn't make it superior. I look at speech as a backup to my AAC formats. Importantly, speech for many people, especially autistic people, is not always easy to use nor reliable. It is not the best way to interact with others for various reasons. For me specifically, speech has always been exhausting. There is sometimes a very long process of thinking of something to say, planning the movements my body has to do, and still get it out in a timely manner. Other times, my mind and my mouth are not connected to each other, and I will say things I don't want. In essence, I am not communicating all the time that I use speech because there is a loss of control over the words that do come out. On the contrary, whenever I am using AAC, it's what I mean to say, and I am communicating my inner thoughts and feelings. I also have epilepsy, and many autistic people do, or even take medicines for various conditions that cause memory loss. Well, this affects word finding and can be another reason for communication breakdown. AAC allows my thoughts and words to be stored for whenever I need them. I also mentioned that using speech to communicate is very exhausting. Using AAC when I can allows me to save precious energy, which means I can lengthen the threshold between potential overload or meltdown. Also, sometimes it's exhausting making speech physically in a way that is understandable.
Do you use different AAC devices for different purposes?
I use different AAC types for different reasons. A lot of it comes down to the differences in voices, the feel of the app, or what device I am using at the time. The AAC speech generating apps that I use all have very different features sometimes, so it depends on the situation.
Next question. When you discovered AAC use for yourself, how did your life change?
I cannot talk about feelings using speech, and therapy is supposed to be talking about feelings, LOL. From the first time I did that, I was hooked on the feeling of power. I felt being able to discuss feelings for the first time in my life. I realized what I had to say was important, even if I couldn't use speech to say it.
At what age did you discover AAC? And is there such a thing as too late to use an AAC device?
I was in my 30s when I was asked to speak to someone via phone, and I told them no, because up to that point, I didn't. But that set off a thought that I could combine writing with a speech generating app, and ever since, I have been using speech generating AAC apps and devices. There is no such thing as too early to learn AAC, and as my story shows, there is no such thing as too late. No matter how old someone is, they deserve to have their voice heard in the way that is most comfortable for them.
Next question. What has research shown about AAC use and language development?
As my story shows, and also research shows, using AAC helps speech. For me, it opened up more communication channels or pathways that allowed me to understand how speech can physically be made. This was true for learning language in general. The more ways a person is exposed to visualizing and learning language, the greater chance it is that thing they need to be able to communicate works for them.
Any advice for parents and professionals concerned about lack of verbal language development when AAC is introduced?
I would advise anyone that is concerned about their students' language abilities, whether it be through speech or through understanding or communicating in general, is to use multiple modes of communication. So sign language, AAC, learning speech, writing, reading, etc. Try to take an approach that uses all of the senses and doesn't force one way or another. The more, the merrier.
How can people become better allies to non-speaking individuals?
People can become better allies for non-speaking people by ensuring that everything is done to have access to full, robust communication through letterboard spelling, typing, AAC speech generating devices, sign languages, and anything else. Non-speaking people don't need us to say anything for them at all. They need their communication rights observed from the moment they are born. After that, they can speak for themselves just fine.
Last question, I think. How can schools and community places support AAC users?
Schools and communities need to support AAC use from as early in life as possible. There should be no early intervention without AAC use. No matter the disability, whether physical or cognitive or combination of disabilities. Every single human has a right to be taught literacy and full communication. Anyone who is left out due to communication differences is left out because of society's willful decision to do so. It is not due to degree of disability or one's own individual failure. That is absolutely a community failure, and until society and culture all over the globe realize this, the collective is making a decision for other people's lives that is morally wrong. Wrong.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. And if anyone has any questions, contact information for Tiffany Joseph is here on Instagram at ni.functioning.autism, Facebook and TikTok also under the same handle names, ni.functioning.autism. And Tiffany has the website or link bio here at www.link.bio/autism. So I'm going to stop doing this screen share here so I can see everyone. Thank you so much, Tiffany and T. We did it. So I just to wrap up with the spotlight that here we are, 3 autistic people. We all have different unique communication preferences. It took us a while to prepare for this presentation today. It took us weeks, but we all came together with our own preferred ways to process information, to write things down. We all come together here today. So it is possible to respect and nurture autistic ways of communication because it's so important for everyone to learn. Thank you so much.
Please begin the Q&A session.
So Tiffany is recommending learning about Gestalt processing and analytical processing. There is a good Facebook group on this exact topic. I think it's called Gestalt processing. I will look it up in a bit and then type it in here. I also earlier recommended Kelly Mayer on YouTube channel to understand about sensory processing, self-regulation, and interoception for a question from a teacher about self-regulation and calming down. Okay. Okay, so I think this question is about eye contact. The use of eye contact to communicate lack of interest, but this isn't necessarily true for autistic. How can we communicate to neurotypicals that lack of eye contact or a different use of eye gaze isn't lack of interest or even discomfort in the interaction? T or TJ, do you have anything to respond to this? TJ says that eye contact types have to be individually known. I think the amount of eye gaze use really different. But under distress is usually something that we let go during an interaction. But it's true that it doesn't mean that we're not interested or we're not invested in the interaction. Question here says, when it comes to finding love for individuals who still need a lot of support, not independent living, but also have been dating, do you have education resources for these types of individuals on how to set boundaries and understand the power of consent? That's a very good question. T said that T tends to have very little eye contact, and also looking in the eyes is like being swallowed by a void for me. Can't listen at the same time. So for neurodivergent people, often we have a hard time with multiprocessing. So like for me, listening and doing something else is very difficult. Listening and processing and being able to respond when I'm under distress is difficult. I have a hard time listening to understand, if you call it that. T is asking. Okay, so T, here's the question. When it comes to finding love for individuals who still need a lot of support, not independent living, but also have been dating, do you have education resources for these types of individuals on how to set boundaries and understand the power of consent, etc.? So Tiffany says, to respond to that question, for consent, I needed to learn by examples of what not to do, practice scenarios, etc. So I'm thinking how to respond to this from a point of view of a parent. Having conversations, role playing, but also being mindful that we don't fix or take over for our neurodivergent person. I think it's important. So for us, I would ask my child, do you need help in this? You know, and allow my child to be able to decide, no, I know what to do, and I would like to try to handle the problem at school. So I think that's just a keep in mind. Tiffany also said that scripts are very helpful for Tiffany when it comes to dating life, and I have them programmed into my AAC device. I think scripts are very helpful. That's true. Yes. T is saying, I'm not very good at it. Direct communication about everything is best for me. So instead of using open-ended questions, direct questions would be better. Okay, so next question. What can college support staff do to provide more inclusive and safer environments for autistic students on college campuses? How can college staff members serve as better advocates for autistic students, especially those who are continually dealing with masking and the impacts of that? So while T and TJ write their responses, I can start the conversation about this. I think changing the mindset to really have the attitude of investing in getting to know neurodivergent students is very important. So an example would be like asking the person, observing and asking the person if the person is struggling and need help. The person might not want our help, but also diving into some specifics. You know, are you able to, for example, if it's a college course, are you able to process the information in the lecture? Do you need any additional support in writing? When I was in college, I was able to buy the written transcript, and that helped me tremendously because I wasn't able to listen to the lecture and write notes, for example. Okay, and Tiffany responded, autism education from autistic people for everyone in the university is helpful if it can be done. Absolutely, yes. Tiffany also said support staff should check heavily on executive functioning. In college, nothing was harder for me and made me fail more than executive functioning and organization. Yes, absolutely. It's okay, T. So we'll just give a moment for T, just in case she needs to catch up. Oh, we lost T. Okay. Okay, next question. What are some good AAC options, especially cost-effective ones? Are there good iPhone apps? So that's a question for you, Tiffany. It's a two-part question. The second question is, are AAC devices considered medical devices and are they covered by insurance or Medicare? If not, do any of you know if there are efforts anywhere to draft legislation to make that a reality? Tiffany's response is this: AAC can be free even. What I used today was Microsoft Word's read aloud or immersive reader option. My favorite app on the iPhone or iPad is TD Snap, formerly Snapcore. Tiffany also said, but I use different options for various reasons. For the iPhone, for the phone, I like Speech Assistant, which is available on Android and iOS. And Tiffany has also recommended Cough Drop, which I have tried with a few of my autistic clients because it's colorful and simple to use, and you can download it on your iPhone and iPad. Tiffany said, I use Proloquo for text for the voices. And Tiffany also recommends Cough Drop is great as it works on every device and the web, right? Tiffany, did we respond about, do any of you know if there are efforts anywhere to draft legislation to make that a reality, to consider AAC devices as medical devices to cover by insurance or Medicare? I don't know the answer to that question But do you know, Tiffany? Tiffany said they're considered medical devices and a lot of times covered by insurance through health insurance or schools. Also, yes, so that's okay. So the next question is, okay, so Tiffany also said that there is still a huge access problem even with it being covered. Next question, how can one unlearn their masking traits that they have done their entire life? This question came from a 27-year-old autistic person. Tiffany also added that there are assistive technology lending libraries in every state. So that's a very good tip. So on the question of learning to unmask, so that's what we're going to respond to this question. I think it takes time to figure out your true identity. It's like peeling all of the sticky notes off of you. And I would maybe, like for me, just to, what I did was I talked to people who knew me when I was younger and just start writing in a journal, just thinking about connecting the dots in past relationships, but just doing it as a way to reflect, just taking a different perspective, like the new me, what I know about me with my sensory differences. And, you know, but it takes time to do that. Tiffany said, with unmasking, I think it's important to learn what you do that is masking. A lot of times it's hard to know what masking you're even doing to learn to unmask, right? It's not a short process, it's a long-term, lifelong process. Yes, absolutely. But it's an important one. I think it gave me so much peace that I can have conversations with my family member about the whys, right? So just being you and understanding the whys and not being ashamed about it. I think unmasking has helped me to be able to self-advocate better. Okay, a question. Should a parent worry if a child has many days where they are choosing not to interact with people or peers at all? Is there a possibility there may be bullying happening? Okay, that's a good question. Okay, Tiffany said choosing not to interact may be sensory break. It could be anxiety or social fear. It could be that other people are not more interesting than whatever that child has going on. Yes, it could also be that you're just trying to preserve your energy. So I find that at the end of the day, I tend to be less talkative or interactive because I just don't have the energy to do it. So Tiffany also said, so I can't say yes or no for bullying. It depends. Yeah. I know for many young children that usually if they're bullying um, going on, I think I mean, they wear their emotions on their sleeves. You could feel their sadness. So that's something to keep an eye on. But social situations at school, first of all, the pace happens very quickly. So I remember as a little girl, I would just follow people along and I would observe, like I'm always observing from the outside. It's not an easy situation on top of just trying to process uh, all the noise coming, during social chatter, so it's not that you don't want to participate, but you're just trying to process everything and you have to be quiet to be able to process everything. But I guess I can see how outsiders might think that we're not interested or we're just being very quiet or aloof. Question, what can we do to help those who use AAC feel more comfortable communicating with us? And Tiffany said, wait a long time, don't read over their shoulder or guess their answers beforehand, and don't interrupt. So while we wait for the next question, maybe there's room for one more question. I just wanted to clarify something that I said during my part of the presentation. I said that autistic children are being taught to speak first instead of being allowed to communicate using their nonverbal communication channels. And I said that this process is backwards. It wasn't backwards. I meant to say that it's out of order or out of sequence developmentally, that most, like all babies, learn to use their nonverbal communication channels first to communicate, and the ability to speak would develop later. But with many autistic children, it's the other way around. So just something to keep in mind. Thank you. Okay, last question. Do you think that classrooms or schools are getting better to be more sensory friendly? Because when I was in school, it was not. And some things teacher would do would be testing my processing speed rather than my knowledge to try to get students to interact. One specific thing I dislike is the game Kahoot. I don't know what that game is. Oh, okay. I think there's a lot of room for improvement in every classroom. A lot of improvement needed, I mean. Tiffany is saying, I don't think schools are better. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. They are more knowledgeable, but not implementing the sensory knowledge. It will be great if every school work with a neurodivergent adult to help them understand changes that can be helpful. Some universal design for sensory accommodations is actually helpful for every student. Tiffany said to get kids more comfortable with AAC, they need to use AAC around them more like speech is. That's an excellent, excellent point. Yeah. Yeah, so teacher would use the AAC, and students who are speaking can also use AAC, do it together. That's true. That's also the same with sensory breaks, because many students, they don't want to have sensory breaks because they feel ashamed. They don't want to stand out. So I think it will be great if just the culture of we all can think better and function better if we have sensory breaks. Let's do it together. Tiffany said the more people around them that see AAC being used, they will be much more comfortable to use, as they aren't so different from everyone. Yes, absolutely. Being different is not a bad thing if it's just part of the culture of being together. Okay, Kira said not enough time to cover all the questions. Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for listening to our part. Thank you. Thank you so much.